Hello, this is David Brower. Welcome to the Make Living Pleasurable Show. Another beautiful episode with a very lovely guest, a very inspiring guest, Pete Bombaci. Let me tell you a little bit about Pete, but first of all, welcome to the show, Pete.
Great to be here, David.
Yes. Pete, the human connection catalyst, which we can see on his t-shirt here. That's great. Today, we're going to be talking about pleasures in catalyzing human connections. Pete is the founder of the GenWell Project, leading a movement whose vision is to make the world a better and healthier place with kindness, generosity, empathy, and human connection. GenWell Project is educating people about the importance of proactive, face-to-face social connection and catalyzing people to take action. Most people were never educated on the importance of human connection for our health and happiness, but now we need to make it happen for today and before the next crisis arrives. GenWell Project is a human connection movement. It exists to address the issues of social isolation, loneliness, and disconnection by generating wellness through the power of human connection. Gotta love it. And research proves that human connection is one of the single largest indicators of our happiness throughout life. It reduces anxiety and depression, increases our compassion, resilience and empathy, and strengthens our immune system and self-confidence, and can increase our chances of living longer by up to 50%. We have a human innate need to connect as human beings, and sometimes we just need a catalyst to make it happen. And what if that catalyst was you? Human connection transcends issues, illness, age, cultures, genders, and more. And we all benefit from greater human connection in our lives. And the GenWell Project is here to raise the collective consciousness in useful, real-world ways and get us all to make it happen more often. Having spent time in the for-profit and not-for-profit worlds, Pete believes that there is a great opportunity to connect those two worlds in driving both purpose and profit for the benefit of everyone through human connection. Welcome to the show, Pete. I'm just so delighted to be here with you.
David, thank you so much. Great to be here. And honestly, after I listened to that, it's kind of like, okay, the show's done. You've shared all the insights. We're over.
Gone. Okay, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for the time.
Now that's interesting. But let's start with this question then. So what is pleasure for you, Pete?
It is interesting, and we had a bit of a chat last week as we were prepping for the show, and I thought about it much for over the course of the weekend and much longer. And honestly, when I think deeper about, we often talk about happiness, and I, as we chatted about a bit, I think of happiness as we think of that as a momentary thing, whereas I think pleasure, to me, may actually be more about the longer term enjoyment of something, the real, and it seems more, it's a deeper feeling of enjoyment. And so I still think, for me, pleasure is connection. It is, spending time with others. I was at my son had a hockey tournament, and and the great thing about connection and pleasure is it can happen in any scenario. It could be talking to somebody on the street. It could be over a dinner table. It could be over drinks. It could be at coffee, whatever the case may be. I was sitting at the poolside watching kids swim in the pool at a hockey tournament, which we do quite often over here in Canada. And I was just so entrenched in a conversation and bringing, great pleasure to myself because I was getting to know and connect with people that I hadn't had the opportunity to connect with before. And so it was really a deep understanding of, wow, I often, even running a human connection movement, get to a point where I come out of a conversation, I go, oh my God, it's so true. I feel so good coming out of a connection and out of a conversation. So I think for me, pleasure really does come back to, relationships, connection, and human interaction.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And do you feel that human connection is only available to certain kinds of people, certain categories of people, like some people are excluded from human connection, the kind that's healing and pleasurable?
No. So here's actually, it's an interesting question, David, because, oftentimes we see connection and we see oftentimes when I first started this movement, people thought, oh, this is a seniors movement because they're the only people who ever are lonely and isolated. And I said, well, yes, we know about the seniors because I think they're so visible to us. And certainly at the start of the pandemic, people, the first people we looked at were our seniors who were locked down in their homes and unable to connect. But what I think people need to understand is that human connection is important to all of us, and loneliness and isolation happens to all of us. And so when you ask the question of, are there some people who can't do it? The answer is no. But I think the important thing, and it's why we've tried to create kind of a global movement and create an increased awareness amongst all of us. The reality is, when we struggle as human beings, for whatever reason, it could be divorce, could be illness, job loss, financial pressures, relationship issues, whatever the case may be, is probably when we feel least like reaching out and connecting with other people. So I'm going to say that everyone has the opportunity, but there are going to be times when some of us just don't feel like doing it. And so I can educate the person who's struggling to say, hey, you need to reach out because, this will be one of the greatest things you can do for you. But here's the other part, is I can educate the rest of the population to be more conscious about those who might be struggling because they're going through an issue, because they might be in a relationship struggle, because they might have lost their job, because they might have financial issue, kid issues, the list goes on of all the challenges that we face. At the end of the day, if all of us can become more conscious and aware of just how important an outreach to somebody else can be, then I believe we can solve a lot of the crises before we get there, because people feel that sense of support, belonging, and care that we all desire in our lives.
Yeah. How would you suggest that we actually make this human connection activity better? How do we get better at doing it? How do we improve?
Yeah, I think it really does. I hate to say this, but our message is always we educate, we empower, and we catalyze. Most of us take physical activity or exercise for granted. We now say, oh, of course, we all know that we should exercise. But we need to recognize that that's been part of our language. That's part of our education for nearly 5 decades. In Canada, we have a Canadian food guide. So we've been telling people that they should eat fruit and vegetables and a balanced meal for 80 years. Now we're in a situation where we're recognizing the research shows that a lack of social connection is as negative to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, has the same negative implications as alcoholism, and double the impact of obesity. Plus, we know that it increases heart disease, it increases early onset dementia, diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity. All these things come when we feel disconnected from one another. And so the reality is none of us have ever been educated on the facts. And you touched on the benefits of, a single largest indicator of happiness, reduces anxiety and depression, empathy, compassion, resilience, strengthens your immune system, your self-confidence, and even a piece of research that came out during the global pandemic. It's the single greatest preventative action that we can take to avoid depression. But David, the question I always say to people is, who knew? We've never educated people on it. And really, it's a wake-up call. Pre-pandemic, this issue was already there. But if you think that, most of the research came out near the end of the 1990s, early 2000s, unless you went to school and were educated on this probably in, early 2000s or maybe in the 2010s, the reality is most of you probably don't understand just how important social connection is for our health, our happiness, our longevity. And therefore, we can't expect people to be incorporating this into their lives. We took these relationships for granted. And I think it took a global pandemic for us to wake up and go, wow, I don't feel so good. I wonder what's changed in my life over the last 19 months. And for the most part, the single greatest change that all of us faced was the fact we weren't able to get out and stay connected to the people that made us feel happy, healthy, connected, belonging, and all those things that really make us feel like we're not alone in this great big world.
So it sounds like a lot of it is simply frequency of connection with people, just kind of more connection every day, whatever this means. Maybe it's talking to the merchant at your local wine shop, maybe it's, when you're going to the doctor, talking to the nurse, I don't know, whatever it is. But again, I kind of continue to ask the question. Somehow it feels like we've also been given some opportunities, and we're getting more and more now that things are heading towards a better reconnection possibility, let's say, for us. Yet I still wonder, how do we get the most out of a connection with somebody else? So that does give us the, greatest return on investment of having said, I'm going to go connect this evening. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go that. Is there any way that you see that, what are the kind of ways, for example, I'll just say one thing possibly is, you really need to be present where you are and with who you're with to really get the most, I would say, value and feeling and connection. But what types of things help us to get more skillful at actually taking this medicine and, at the right moment and the right dose and I hope you can't overdose.
Yeah. I wonder if you could. I don't know.
Yeah, too much going out. I mean, that can happen.
Well, yeah, you can burn. You can burn out from expending too much energy. Because hey, we're a human connection movement, but we also understand the importance of connecting with oneself. And so, this is just one component of living a balanced lifestyle. But the reason why we focus so specifically on social connection is, as I said earlier, most of us have been educated on physical health, and we've been educated on eating well, and even mental health. When most people talk about mental health, they focus on gratitude or breathing or mindfulness or yoga or journaling, and all those things are done individually. And Maslow called out love and belonging, which we refer to as social health, in a different level of his hierarchy. And the reason is you cannot do social connection on your own. And this is why we need to create a national movement or a global movement that helps all of us recognize that we all play a role in solving for this. But stepping back to your question, first off, all relationships are important in our lives, both the deep, meaningful relationships that you might have with loved ones and family, but also those casual collisions that happen throughout our days. And those were the ones that were wiped out during the global pandemic. Is over 65% of the connections. This is from our recent Canadian Social Connection Survey, which we did in June of this year, showed that 65% of the connections we had every day weren't in our calendar. And so those were wiped out of our lives. And so recognizing that, when you saw the mailman or the person at the coffee shop or at the water cooler, the lunchroom, on your way to work, on your way to the gym, all those connections are what give you that sense of connection and understanding that you're not in this world alone. And we had a social psychologist on a webinar we did a couple of weeks ago for students, and he highlighted that when we see people and we connect with them, old friends, and they say, "Hey, David, how are you?" and the response is positive, it's also a great reflection in ourselves, because when I see how people respond to me, it makes me realize that I'm valued, that people love me and care about me and think I'm interesting and all those beautiful things. And so 65% of those connections that gave you that type of reinforcement every day were wiped out. And we wonder why we feel so disconnected and alone during the global pandemic. So all of this information is what we need to educate people on. Some other facts that came out of our survey, talking to strangers makes you 3 times as likely to be happy. Knowing your neighbor reduces your likelihood of a sense of loneliness by 3 times. Spending time with colleagues is almost as good as spending time with friends and family. And I think that goes to the point where we spend so much time at work that when you have a place to go where you feel a sense of belonging and you feel connected, that's obviously going to make that experience when you go to the office or when you're working feel much better. But again, we've been working from home for most of the last 2 years, and we haven't had that sense of connection and belonging because we haven't had the opportunity to work side by side with the people in our lives. So to me, when we talk about how we're going to make this happen, I think the starting point is by educating people so that people recognize what's in it for me. And again, maybe an even greater purpose is helping people recognize the impact that they can have by reaching out to somebody else and just saying, hey, David, how you doing? Hey, I haven't seen you in 6 months. I haven't. And I actually, on the weekend, my son's hockey tournament, I was talking to a gentleman. He came down the next morning at breakfast and he said, I just want to say thank you. And I said, for what? And he said, well, after you told me what you were doing with the GenWell Project, I reached out to an old friend that I used to golf with that I haven't spoken to, for 3 months. And I used to see him every week. And I just wanted to check in on him. And I thought to myself, see how simple this is if we can prompt people to think, if we can prompt people to think about who is it in your life that you haven't reached out to in a little while. And if every one of us took one action a day, text one person, text one family member, text, we really can make the world a happier and healthier place pretty quickly.
I love that, Pete. I used to be pretty crazy about that, reaching out to people. I've always told myself I was one of the first people to ever send like crazy face photos and video messages instead of just like a chat text things. And I remember, early days with some of my friends, who now look back and tell stories about when we just started, connecting that, I'd send all these weird face photos, like with crazy expressions, to express something. It was basically me doing the meme or icon.
The original memes.
But, the original meme. And somehow I'm just trying to get them to laugh or like feel good or, connect with an emotion and like also kind of stand out in life, and be who I am. And sometimes I've struggled just kind of using text. And I felt in this past period, so I live alone, I felt a certain hunger for connection. I'm someone who also gathers people quite a bit. And I wonder if people haven't gotten a little bit, not addicted, but, we say you create habits in like 60 days or something. And, we went through periods where the lockdown was almost that long where you don't see anyone. And like shifting gears then to say, oh, do I go out now or not? When people are still kind of questioning stuff. We talked just like before we got online, I was going out to go salsa dancing Friday and I was kind of tired. I'm like, I don't know if I want to go. I got to get up early tomorrow morning. And I went. And I'm really happy that I went. So yeah, this sense of belonging that we have a little bit lost in some ways is so nourishing. I don't know if we all realized that so much until this happened.
Yeah, I often say, David, I think we took our connections for granted. We just assumed they'd always be there. And unfortunately, I used to, one of my uncles was an electrician, and one time I was working with him, and he was a beautiful wall, and he started hammering through the wall. And I said, Uncle Clive, what are you doing? You're breaking a good wall. And he said, Pete, sometimes you got to break things down to make them better. And I almost feel like this is what the pandemic has done for us, is that I do hope that on the other side of this, that the message of the GenWell Project and just the power of human connection is more recognized, because we have, although I still believe, David, and it's hard for me to believe this, that as we come out of the global pandemic, people still think it's something else. It's because they weren't able to go to work. That's why they don't feel so good. And it's because of, I wasn't able to go to the party, or I wasn't able to go to the sporting activity, or I haven't seen live music. And if you think through all of those activities I've just identified, what is core to every one of those activities? It's people. I posted something a couple of weeks ago on my socials, and I'd had 4 or 5 people in a week say, I really missed the office. And my comment was, do you miss the office, like the physical space, the chairs, the tables, the walls, or do you miss the people? And I still think that there's work to be done in helping people recognize how much those interactions that we have every day are, important to our health. And as I say, we take even physical activity for granted because it's been part of our education system for 50 years, certainly in Canada. I don't know what it's like in France, but I'm sure it's been part of it, because you see young kids exercising and playing. And, the important thing is we need to make it that simple for people. And yet it is always going to be difficult because, physical activity, I can tell you to go for a walk and you can do it on your own. Bike ride, do it on your own. When you go to the grocery store, I can tell you to eat fruit and vegetables, and you make the choice. Are you going to go buy fruit and vegetables or go back to the snack aisle again? But the difference with social connection is we need other people. When you text somebody or you call somebody, the key is that we need to recognize I'm on the other end of that phone, and I can play a role in David's life because I pick up the phone or respond to a text. Or, another part, and I think you've touched on it with your, you say you gather people all the time. On the other side of the pandemic, I think we need a lot of leaders. We need people to have the confidence to go first, to send out that invite and say, do you want to go for coffee? Do you want to have dinner? Do you want to, because most of us sit here as a human innate need to connect, and most of us go, geez, I'm really lonely, but we don't reach out to anybody. And so, it's not easy. And yes, the fear of rejection can get the best of us at times. But overall, we just need to say, look, if the research tells me that usually when I reach out, it ends up in a good experience, if it tells me that I'll feel better in doing it, then we just have to give people the idea, the excuse. And if it's not an old friend because you're concerned about what went on in the past, leave a note on your neighbor's door. How about going and volunteering and helping somebody by getting connected and helping other people? There's 50 different ways, and that's what we talk about on our social feeds for the GenWell Project and on our website. And so we're just trying to educate and empower people to get started, and then a couple times a year we catalyze them as well.
Yeah, that's nice. I wanted to actually segue into that and hear a little bit more about how do you gather people? What happens when you gather them to nourish them and I guess educate, grow, and inspire them? Your three words, those were not them, I think. But,
you were close. You were close.
How are you doing that so as to make it a meaningful, valuable, and so you're creating these new catalysts for the world?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I often jokingly say we don't do anything. And what I mean by that is, we educate people each and every day because, as you talked about, we're talking about behavior change here. We're asking people to create habits that are healthy for them and healthy for the people around them. So the first step is making sure that people understand the why. Why is it worth you talking to your neighbor or calling up an old friend or gathering people for, and one of the things we often talk about is it doesn't need to be big. It doesn't need to, you don't have to close the street. This is literally having a coffee with somebody and recognizing the power of that coffee. So we do that each and every day through our socials and through our website. We empower people. Every Friday we put up an infographic that helps people, and we do tips, tools, and ideas throughout the course of the week. But also on Friday we have our infographics that we want to give people context to say, hey, here's 5 ideas on building stronger friendships. Here's 5 ways you could talk to your neighbor starting today. Here's 5 ways to, connect with a colleague. Here's 5 ways. And so we're trying to give people 5 different ideas on how they can get started, or also recognizing the 5 different people that might benefit from your outreach. Because when we think that it's not about us and that it's actually about helping other people, for some people, that's the hurdle that they need to get over that will give them the confidence to reach out to somebody. And so, through the global pandemic, there's probably nobody who you don't have an excuse to call up and say, hey, David, how are you holding up through 19 months of lockdowns? As a common experience that we've all gone through, that's certainly, something that's a good starter question for any conversation. And then finally, on the catalytic front, and this is where I say we don't do anything, a lot of people have asked, like, hey, so are you running parties? Are you guys getting people together? Are you, and what the research shows and what the reality is if I was to host a big event in Toronto and invite the world to come to Toronto, how many of the people that were there would actually get connected and build lifelong friendships or relationships? Probably not many. And so what we're really trying to catalyze and what we're trying to inspire are connections with the people that you're either emotionally or physically connected to. we're physically connected to our neighbors and our colleagues because we tend to be right beside them, whether it's in the office or at home. And we're emotionally connected to family and friends. And so our aspiration is to get you to be the leader, to get you to take that one action that builds a bigger and stronger relationship with any one of those groups. And we do this twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall. Excuse me. And those weekends are chosen strategically because people struggle with seasonal transition. Suicide rates in the Northern Hemisphere are highest in the springtime. Often people think it's the wintertime, and it's not. And there's a couple reasons, that happens. Number one is, with the blossoming of trees, there's inflammation in the body, and so there's some biological impact there. But the second one that they point to is the social pressures that come with warming temperatures. And so as it gets warmer, especially now when we have these things, now you're no longer just competing with the people you can see out your front window. Now you're competing with the world. And if everybody else is out on a patio and having fun and life is good and, the summer is coming, then, if you're not in that headspace, that can also act as a negative spiral for you. And then we do it again in the fall because we come off the slower pace of summer routines. We start to ramp back up. And what we want to do is give people that excuse. On our weekends, we are the perfect excuse and the opportunity for you to knock on a neighbor's door and say, hey, I'm supporting this thing, just like we do with cancer and mental health and other issues. I'm supporting this movement called the GenWell Project. It encourages us to get together. I'd love to invite you over for a coffee this weekend. Why don't you come for pizza or a barbecue? Or do you want to get your kids out to play a game? We don't care what it is. We just want to give people that excuse. And what having that excuse does is it kind of puts that one little barrier between the fear of rejection. So if they reject the idea, they're not rejecting you personally. They're rejecting the concept of the GenWell Project. And so you can say, okay, well, we'll try it next time because we want to continue to try and build these connections. So those catalytic moments are there for a reason. They're there as an excuse to give you permission and hopefully give those people who might be just on the fringe of saying, geez, I'd love to get connected with somebody, but I just don't have the right idea or the right excuse or the right permission. And that's what we're trying to provide people so we can all do it for our own health and for the health of those around us.
Yeah, it's really great stuff. It's a lot of relational, social skills that serve in everything in life. Now, have you noticed any difference in the social connection abilities or success or whatever it is between people who are single versus people who live in a family setting or who have dogs? Or is there anything in the studies that you've explored that would suggest that, contrary to common sense, it's not the people who are single or alone, who live alone or whatever, that are actually suffering the most from human connection? It's actually on another register or another level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And at the end of the day, nothing is black and white. There are people who live alone who love their solitude, which is a beautiful thing that, they can certainly enjoy that time alone to read or practice hobbies or do things that keep them completely engaged, and who also may have massive social circles who, and we look at Europe as a great example, and, that's where you are. At the end of the day, when you look at the size of places where people live in Europe, oftentimes, homes were built in Europe to do one thing, and that was to, probably maybe eat, but more than anything, it was sleep. And the rest of the day was spent outside. It was on a cafe. Yeah. It was eating. It was connecting with other people. It was being at the Corso. I've been to Italy, and I've ran into some Greek fellows here in Toronto at a Tim Hortons, which is our, favorite coffee, the big, massive chain of coffee shops over here. And there was, 8 or 10 Greek men in the back. And I said, hey, guys, how you doing? Why are you here? I was already into GenWell. This is probably 3 years ago. And he said, because Toronto sucks. And I was like, whoa, that's a bit harsh. And he said, because there's no place to gather. He said, so, we come to Tim Hortons because there is no Corso where everybody goes and hangs out. There's no place in local communities. Yeah, I guess there's some parks, and we have lots of them over here. But, everybody has to figure out their way to connect. And for some people, it's on a front porch. For some people, it's in a park. For some people, it's on a Corso. Who knows where it is. But I think we're all kind of waking up to, we need to make it happen one way or another.
Yeah, that's great. And it's really quite fascinating that, this concept of being a catalyst to this, from the simplest thing of maybe sitting in a restaurant and starting a conversation with someone next to you or in a cafe, or waiting in line, some long lines, since we wait in a lot of long lines these days, to actually connecting with people instead of kind of overly staying in our own bubble. And like you say, not everyone's going to open up to something, but one of the ways I do that is if I see something that I notice something that I appreciate in somebody, on somebody. It could be something they're wearing. It could be something that I see they're reading, something that gives me a little bit of context to say, wow, I can, there's something to share there. There's something to express there. And, I'm constantly looking kind of for the beauty in life. And I think part of it is so that I can find something to express and share with somebody, and potentially open up a conversation where otherwise there wouldn't really be a reason for that. I mean, it could be like, look at those great red leather shoes. I'm like, those shoes are amazing. Just like a compliment is a great way to kind of start a conversation. And I've often felt that quite pleasant when someone does that to me. Sometimes you're not maybe in the mood for a conversation, or you're doing something or whatever, but it's almost like being in a taxi, right? Do you want to have the conversation, or are you kind of doing your thing on your phone, want to make a phone call, or just in your headspace? And all of that's okay. But I really love this idea of you really getting down to the granular to share with people and show with people that connection is like all around us. You just need to walk outside your door. It's probably easier in a cosmopolitan city like New York or Paris or San Francisco, where people are walking, maybe even Toronto, versus somewhere like Los Angeles, or where like most people in their cars, like you have to go somewhere to actually get that. So yeah, it's like the little details that we notice are so meaningful if we give meaning to them. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's a great comment, David. At the end of the day, when will you give meaning to it? It's when you understand how important it is, whether it's for you or for the other person. Whether you want to talk about urban centers or rural centers, at the end of the day, if people are walking around with their heads in their phones and not looking up, we just launched a campaign on campuses in Canada called Heads Up. And the whole point is, number one, get your head out of your phone. Number two, just be conscious about the importance of your social health. And number three, be conscious about the impact that you can have on other people. Because if we all walked around a little more heads up, I truly do believe what you just described would be solved. Because, when somebody, and, it's tough to do, obviously, here on a virtual call, but when somebody's looking at you square in the eyes as you're walking down the street, and then when you get closer, they go, "Hi, how are you?" Or they, engage in whatever way they're going to do, even a nod, a smile, all those things are about connection. And you can't not, as somebody, I was having a conversation with somebody who said last week, she said, like, every time I smile at somebody, they smile back. And it's like, well, you're having a massive impact, whether you know it or not. And so, let's all give people the courage, because I do believe that, especially when it comes to strangers, we've been told not to talk to strangers for, 100 years. And the reality is, the research shows it makes you happier. Over 90% of the time, it ends up in a positive experience for both parties. And it's a simple thing to do. And even for introverts who may feel a little self-conscious about connecting with other people, the power of a stranger is you can just say hello and keep walking. And you can see the response of the person. You can see them smile. You can see them say hello back. And so there's no commitment to a lifelong partnership or relationship or even a conversation. But those simple actions that each of us can take by being more conscious and aware every day can make not only ourselves happier and healthier, but frankly, the world. And that's our goal, is if we can educate people on all the value of all the different connections in our lives and help you find the ones that are right for you. You know, if it's talking to a stranger, talking to your neighbor, talking to a colleague, a classmate, an old friend, a new friend, you know, doing volunteer work, joining some, you know, groups or different things, but understanding why we're doing it. You know, yes, you want to help other people, but there's a really great opportunity in connecting. Joining a book club. I'm not even sure people like books. You know, it's actually about the people, because we spend more time after we talk about the book. We sit around and we have conversation for 30 minutes. Maybe it's about the book, but maybe it's about life. And I think this is where we need to raise the consciousness for people to say, is it the book or is it actually about connecting? And yes, it's probably about both, but let's just be as conscious about how important those human connections are for our life and our happiness. And our pleasure, David, and our pleasure.
Yeah, and the pleasure, absolutely. You know, you get the pleasure, but I think that's a real sweet spot. You're doing something that you like or you want to learn about, some hobby, some extracurricular activity, even traveling. I mean, there's so many ways to do that, overlapping that with the actual connection, the curiosity, because curiosity is a huge part of it, right? And lifting our head to actually sort of sense the world again, right? Instead of being so connected to some of our devices.
Yeah.
So what are you suggesting these days for human connection in the dating space?
In the dating space, well, you know, hey, at the end of the day, if you don't talk to, you know, again, there's online dating, and I've done online dating in the past, and I find it great. You know, yes, it doesn't mean, just like in real life, it doesn't mean every time you connect with somebody that it's going to end up in a lifelong relationship. But, you know, not virtual dating, I guess, online dating is a great way to build some initial connection with people so that you feel like you have some common interest. But again, I still believe that, you know, everything is going to come down to face, whether that's your initial connection or whether that's the end result of, you know, the digital connection. At the end of the day, unless we get the time to see faces and emotions and connect as human beings, you know, we're never going to build it to anything other than you know, like a social media friend where we, you know, go back and forward and, you know, we can say things and like and share. And, you know, at the end of the day, what we need to do is connect as human beings, because that's how we build lifelong relationships.
Yeah, and I'm very sensitive to that. I realize that probably one of my love languages is physical touch and quality time in person and shared experiences. And that's, you know, that stuff is challenging to live in the digital online space without actually being able to be with someone in person.
Well, so digital and a pandemic.
Yeah, no, on top of it.
Yeah.
On top of it. Yeah.
And let's be grateful, because without digital technology, I would hate to see, you know, we know that anxiety and depression will be at the highest levels that they've ever been coming out of the global pandemic. And so, you know, God forbid we had gone through that without the ability to connect as human beings physically, and we weren't able to use digital technology to connect. I honestly think we're already in the midst of a massive tragedy, and we do need to be conscious and support each other. But if we didn't have that, I'd hate to see where we would have ended up.
It's such a great point. I want to circle back on what you talked about in terms of follow through. I'm a you know, so-called super connector, and I've always believed that creating relationships is really my responsibility if there's somebody I'm interested in, and that actually all of the relationship building actually doesn't happen right when you meet somebody. When you meet somebody, and hopefully it's more a connection moment than a so-called networking. Not that networking is bad, but I don't know who said it, but I always take this expression, you know, networking is, and it depends what your intention is and what you're using it for, but kind of networking is for amateurs and connection is for the pros.
Oh, I love that.
You know, these are the people, you know, we know that it goes beyond just a transactional thing, you know, even a skills-based thing. For me to think that, you know, if I connect with somebody who has some service potentially to provide me, I better have a connection with them on top of it. I'm just, there's enough people doing things in the world that we don't need to stick with somebody, whether it's a doctor that we don't like, that has terrible bedside manner, or some, service provider or something that, has a bit of an attitude, or you just don't resonate, or they don't seem to get you. Because that's the connection piece. It feels like for me, the value of human connection is diminished. And so to come back to the follow-up and follow through, I mean, when you have a moment of connection with somebody where you get behind the sort of simple stuff and usual questions and these types of things, when you actually feel like, wow, it's so great just to be in this person's presence. We laugh a lot. There's as many ways that the way they think really fascinates me. I love their values that I can sense, et cetera. That where you go from there, the next day is where really the value of the human connection is. Like we were just talking about it, if there's no follow-up and follow-through, especially when, I don't know what this study was that says like you need to spend like 50 hours with somebody to become like a friend. I don't know where this number came from, but think about that. It takes time to build a relationship. And when you don't feel like you're getting traction, or you don't feel like there's sort of back and forth and stuff, maybe, it takes a little bit more investment. But nonetheless, I am always saying to myself, if there's somebody I'm just like fascinated by or love for whatever reason, I want them in my life, I'm going to keep going at it. And little by little, like the scales tip and you become kind of that person in their life potentially. It doesn't always happen. But sometimes you can be kind of, the one creating and leading, as you're talking about, to create the connection, to offer the space for gathering, to propose the events and the outings and whatever, until at which point you kind of get to kind of a new level of relationship that, you have all these sort of touch points in already. And when you get together, your even connection is way faster and way more healing, I think, potentially, because you're more perhaps intimate. So I'm curious your feelings and thoughts about, human connections, like on one side, it's the starting point for me, and then you got to catalyze this, but also like it's this ongoing like lifestyle and way of being and responsibility to be able to offer for yourself and others human connection. But it can't just be one-off. I mean, I guess it could be, but because I see a lot of people who are not very good at building relationships. And I just wonder, are they getting the human connection that they really could and that they want and deserve and value?
Yeah, you said a ton there, David. So first off, the original stats that you taught, I think it's 50 hours to build a friendship, 80 hours to build the next level, which I forget what the phrase is, but a lifelong friendship is 200 hours of time spent together. And this is why many of the deep, meaningful relationships that we have over our lifetime start from, our high school years or our university years, where you literally, spend your entire day living as roommates with somebody or going to classes with them. But they actually say after the age of 30, it becomes really difficult to build those lifelong friendships. So again, a big part of what I think our role is to educate young people to make sure that they're valuing those relationships and connections when they're younger, but also to the rest of us to say, hey, you're right, it does take time. And, we have some different tips, tools, and ideas on how to do that. First off is, get regular connections into the calendar. Who are those people that you do want to build those lifelong friendships with? Well, you know what? Is there a weekly? Is it bi-weekly? Is it monthly? Is it a card game? Is it dinner? Is it, put those in the calendar, because men specifically are not very good at the spontaneity stuff. Many of us sit around and thinking, geez, I'd really love to get together with the guys, and none of us will actually send out the invite. So, and then when somebody does, we're all like, I'm in, I can't wait to get in, and then when we do it, we all go, God, why did we take so long? Why didn't we do this long ago? And so this is the message and the mission of the GenWell Project, is if I can get you to actually, your word, and I love you picked up on it, which is if I can get you to lead, if I can give you the confidence to actually send that invite to a bunch of friends and say, hey guys, we haven't seen each other in 6 months, or maybe at the end of the pandemic in 19, 20 months. hey, why don't we get together? I'm having a couple Christmas lunches with my buddies, and it wasn't me who sent it out. So let's be clear. I struggle with this. I'm leading this movement, but this isn't easy for me either. Especially I work in isolation. I don't have an office, don't have a team. And so, oftentimes I struggle with it as well. And I think this is why I'm so passionate in trying to inspire us all to take those little steps that can make all the difference in the world. So.
Yeah, I love it. I'm actually, you'll love this, Pete. I'm putting on a Christmas party, which is called, I think it's Christmas Connection Sensorial Party or something. And my initial inspiration for this was there are a lot of people who work alone or in small teams or whatever, and they don't belong to companies that put on the Christmas party. Yeah. And so they don't have a Christmas party. Yeah. And so I'm like, well, what if I put on a Christmas party? And one of the inspirations is that anyone who's not having a Christmas party,
you come to the Christmas party.
Come to my Christmas party. So, but I'm, in my own way, trying to gather and to offer a space and a moment of connection in the way that I do that.
That's a beautiful thing.
Is a little parenthesis. So, but you're welcome to come if you want.
Yeah. Hey, I'm in. Quick flight across the pond, and we're there.
There you go. It's easy. So I would like to give everyone an opportunity to find out where we can find you, Pete, and whatever else you'd like to share about what's going on right now for GenWell Project and yourself.
I just want to say, first off, thank you, David. It's great to have this conversation. We've had a couple chats now, and I've enjoyed them immensely. You are very connected to this mission that we're on, and you understand it. And I hope anybody who gets the opportunity to tune in and listen to this conversation finds one or two ideas on how they might be able to build healthier connection habits in their own life as well. But for those who are looking for more information, I think the first thing is head over to our social platforms. Not all social media is bad. If we're following organizations that help us stay more focused or more positive and add value to our lives, something like the GenWell Project is a great place to go. So you can follow us on all the platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can head over to our website at genwellproject.org. You can sign up and take a pledge. We are trying to grow a global movement here. So having people join us so that you can stay in tune with our monthly newsletter, it gives us an opportunity to reach out and remind people and continually build this movement to a point where we can make the world a happier and healthier place, one connection at a time. And, outside of that, I just want to wish everybody a happy holiday and say, don't forget about other people around you that might benefit from your outreach. It's certainly about us getting happier and healthier. But one of the greatest things we can all do is think of who else might be able to fill a seat at our table. So thank you, David, again for the chat. And I'll look forward to continuing our connection on the other side of this conversation.
That's beautiful. And I was going to ask you to conclude the episode, and you just have in the most beautiful way. So we're going to stop on that beautiful, beautiful message. And thanks so much for being here, Pete. And thanks, everyone. We'll see you all on the next show.
Thank you, David.